Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to provide a therapist and a dietitian's insight to how stress and anxiety impact how and what we eat. Our goal is to help build awareness of this topic and hopefully provide a sense of validation that you are not alone when struggling with binging or overeating in response to anxiety or in response to stress. At the end of our discussion, we'll have a Q&A of common questions that we've received while working one-on-one with our clients. Justin, I would love for you to introduce yourself and your practice. But first, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate your willingness to participate and make this video together and just sharing your expertise and practical tips. It's been so helpful for me, especially. We haven't known each other for very long, but it has been my privilege to work with you on this project and learn more about you and how you support your clients with their mental health. You're very thoughtful and articulate, and I think our viewers are in for a treat today.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here as well. Thanks for those warm words, Caitlin. And I feel the same way. This is a great topic, and this is something I'm really interested about and passionate about. But first, I'm Justin Tobin. I'm a clinical therapist based out of Chicago, Illinois. I've been in private practice for about 20 years or so and have a small group practice. We work with a lot of clients struggling with anxiety, depression, panic attacks, life transitions, and health issues, both chronic pain and sort of acute health issues. And we use different approaches depending upon what the client is needing to work on. Um, that seems to be, most helpful. And a lot of what we discover is that there's a huge correlation between mental health and physical health, and eating specifically. And just excited to dive into this topic with you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited as well. My name is Kacilyn Helton. I'm a senior registered dietitian for our business development side of Doherty Nutrition. We are a practice of dietitians. We have over 20 providers that specialize in various areas of medical nutrition therapy. I work with a lot of eating disorders and disordered eating clients, but I also help with hormonal health, weight management, diabetes, gastrointestinal, heart health, and all of the above, right? So just general health and wellness as well. And we have in-person and virtual locations, mostly based in Texas, but we did just recently open our first in-office location in Chicago, which is, I think, how
Right.
we got introduced, which is super exciting. We do accept most major insurance plans, and a lot of our clients are able to bill under like preventative care, which is very minimal out-of-pocket costs for a lot of our clients. So, and do y'all work with insurance as well?
We do, yeah. Blue Cross Blue Shield PPO and Aetna PPO. Uh,
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely makes it more accessible, like working with a dietitian and therapist, which is
Hmm.
so needed. And I am very excited that we got to meet and that we're going to be talking about this today because working one-on-one with clients as a dietitian, this subject of like stress eating, overeating,
Hmm.
or eating foods that you really don't intend to, it pops up a lot in response to the client's mental health, whether that's stress, anxiety, depression, so forth and so on. So initially, clients will come see me for assistance getting individualized nutrition goals. Like, I need help with my diet. Please help me. And I'm like, absolutely, that's what I'm here for. So we do an assessment, kind of dive into some background information, of course, establish rapport, get a game plan going. And then boom, after a few follow-ups, life happens. The plan is derailed, sabotaged, and they get stressed and anxious and come back and they're like, I failed. Caseload, like, what do I do? We have this beautifully outlined nutrition plan, maybe a meal plan. Maybe it's that specific. Maybe it's just more like, hey, let's add protein, add fiber, more general. But stress, anxiety, it always seems to throw them off track. And I always say, my job is not to give you a grade. There's no such thing as a failed goal, but my job is to provide that support system that they need to help them no matter what life throws their way. However, common theme is that mental health, stress, and anxiety seems to throw them off track. And I think you described something similar. So could you give your perspective of what clients bring to the table when they're talking to you?
Yeah, not too far off. I mean, there's something very powerful about the success failure, all or none way of thinking.
Mhm.
And anytime that someone is, aiming for all, or they've defined success through you can't fail, that inevitably is going to end up in a very hard space. And that's when I think anxiety and stress really kicks in because it's hard enough to change behaviors. It's hard to change these eating patterns um, but then it's coupled with this added pressure. And if you're not hitting a certain goal, boy, can you really get in trouble. And I think
Mhm.
that's where we start to see with clients that the more that mental health, the more that anxiety or depression or stress isn't controlled, the more it just kind of builds and builds. And one coping mechanism has been at times, eating, and it's a great way to satiate some sort of emotional need. Um, and it could be helpful for like a quick fix of get me through this anxious period, but it just doesn't help, in the long term. And it's a tricky pattern to get away from.
Absolutely. And I just think this is a great point where our practices can intersect because they come to me and they're like, oh, my mental health is struggling and it's getting in the way of my nutrition goals. And I think you're seeing the other side of that of providing support for the mental health, but nutrition is not going the way that they intended due to the underlying like mental health component, stress and anxiety. So today, main topic is how stress and anxiety impact our eating, like how that stress response plays out with eating patterns. Now, I think I mentioned before, I work with a lot of eating disorder clients, and some of them have binge eating disorder. And so there might be other like neurochemical things going on with that mental health diagnosis, the ones that actually meet the DSM-5 criteria. But more than just like my diagnosed binge eating disorder clients, I do a screening for disordered eating patterns in every single person who comes into my office, or if it's virtual, who logs into the telehealth app. But I ask them, like, how's your relationship with food? Um, what do you how do you cope with stress in a healthy way? Like, do you have any healthy coping skills? And do you eat in response to stress? What does that look like? Do you feel like you have control or mindfulness, staying present in the moment when you're eating, or does it kind of feel like mechanic, habitual, or almost like an addiction? And I use like heavy air quotes around that. But bottom line is it's presenting itself in a way that they're uncomfortable with and that they need more support on. So I just wanted to give like a trigger warning for any of our listeners or viewers um, that some of these things that I say today, I may not say face to face to like some of my clients. It depends on the person sitting in front of me. And I try to be very cautious with the words that I use and respectful of like where they are in their relationship with food, their body image, so forth and so on. So if you do have a diagnosed eating disorder, this may not be like the place for you to get individualized counseling, but this is hopefully going to spread awareness of this common issue that many of my clients, I would say most people face, is overeating in response to anxiety or stress. But Justin, I was just wondering if you could give me a little bit more insight, like laying the foundation here. Why do we have anxiety or stress? What is the purpose of that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first to back up for a second, I appreciate that disclaimer as well, for those that are, watching this and participating in it. I think so much of our experience with therapy or with changes in eating behaviors, working with a dietitian, it needs to be individualized. And I think sometimes a lot of clinicians get into this habit of a one size fits all approach. And that's where I think treatment just does a little bit more of a disservice. People get a little bit put into a box, and it's unfortunate. These diagnoses, like you said, the DSM is so crucial. The
Mhm.
treatment plan is so crucial, but there needs to be a little bit more to it. Uh, and I think when it does kind of capture more than just a diagnosis, then things start to resonate a little bit more, right? We can all pop on Instagram and kind of see what's best or what works or what doesn't work for some. And depending upon the likes or the hearts, oh, wow, I really should try that. But, in reality, that doesn't necessarily mean that's always the best approach. It's the best approach for whoever's watching it at that
Yeah.
time. And I think we all know this. But it's just harder to practice it in the moment, especially we just want change.
Hmm.
And I think
Absolutely.
that kind of, and you see that as well, I imagine.
Yes, 100%. I just struggling to make that change and then keep up with it in a consistent way that's going to be impactful for their health long term. It's a
Hmm.
big barrier, and I think a lot of people need more support or just awareness. So that's why I wanted to complete this video with you because I think it'd be really helpful for most people, even if they're not going to meet all of the DSM-5 criteria.
Right, right. So to kind of back up to your question, um, what is like the purpose of anxiety?
Mhm.
And anxiety is it serves a wonderful purpose. A lot of times working with clients, one of the first things I hear is, I don't want this anxiety anymore, or fix me, or help me get rid of this. And my line inevitably is, this is not about fixing. This is not about getting rid. Anxiety is there for a reason. And that reason is it does a few things. One is it indicates when it is that we are being threatened by something. And the problem with anxiety, especially that anxiety that's just not resolved or just hasn't really been treated to its fullest extent, is we start to perceive a threat that's really not a threat.
Mhm.
And in doing so, the anxiety button gets pushed a little bit more and a little bit more. So some of this from sort of like an oversimplified neuroscience perspective, the anxiety and these panic symptoms that people experience, the heart beating really fast, a
Yeah.
lot of sweating, difficulty concentrating. I feel like I'm having a heart attack. What's wrong with me? These flooded with
Mhm.
these thoughts. It really comes from the section of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is in charge of the fight, flight, freeze response, which is something that evolutionary speaking, we've had from zillions of years ago. And it protected us. So when there was a predator coming, a big dinosaur coming, we would either, hey, we could take this thing and try to fight it. Hey, maybe we can run away from this thing, and we would fight, we
Yeah.
would run, or we would freeze. And inevitably, we try to like blend into something, or something comes up, so we just sort of stop there. And in doing so, it's just evolved over time. And those that
Yeah.
have anxiety, um, we'll start to see that some instances of what we think is more threatening than it needs to be actually causes us to feel even more anxious and even more anxious. And the more anxious we
Mhm.
become, then the more we start to believe that that really is a threat. Like giving this webinar today, I had nerves, I had anxiety coming into it, but the anxiety made sure that I got a good night's sleep last night. It made sure that I did some deep breathing, prior to us
Yep.
doing the webinar. But most importantly, if I only listened to that anxiety and said that this is never going to go around, I'm never going to get the thoughts out, that I'm not going to explain
Mhm.
myself, then that's exactly what's going to happen. But the worst part is, this is what's going to happen the next time and the next time. So the anxiety makes things stick together. Our
Yeah.
experience of having a lot of anxiety in one moment uh, can then translate and be generalized to the next moment, and so on and so forth. And as that continues, that pattern gets very, very tight. And the tighter
Mhm.
patterns get, the more desperate we try to get out of it. Deep breathing doesn't just work all the time, because it needs to be a little bit more than just taking a few breaths. There needs to be more intentionality behind why we're
Mhm.
taking that deep breath. So there's Band-Aid approaches that we could talk about a little bit later on as well. I know people have questions about Band-Aid. When I say Band-Aid approaches, I mean like quick fixes, if you will,
Yeah.
in the moment, versus what I longer term. Uh, but for the most part, the anxiety is around our thoughts, what it is that we're thinking about as we see this threat,
Right.
and the feeling of the anxiety, and then
Mhm.
the behaviors. And when we have these really powerful behaviors, sometimes that guides us into what it is that we feel like we have to do. Uh,
Yeah.
and again, we get into trouble. But that was,
100%.
I said I wasn't going to go into too much. I was going to oversimplify the neuroscience. I don't know if I oversimplified it or not, but what about is there something similar? Or I imagine there is similarities with.
I think what you touched on, like with the escape, like saying, oh, I want to be free from this anxiety, free from this stress. So, how do I get rid of it? Instead of saying, like, oh, this is a natural response. This is something that I can work through and I can use. And like you said, like on this morning on the way to work, I was listening to relaxing music and doing a little deep breathing myself. Like the anxiety is there for a reason and it's natural and we can learn how to work through it. And I love the way you put that. I think that was wonderful. But the food, from the nutrition perspective, it becomes a way to escape it. And I love that you went over the fight or flight response because that's something that I wanted to touch on too. So initially, the fight or flight response, it's going to signal that release of epinephrine, adrenaline. It's going to elevate our heart rate. But what that does for our digestion, our body's not going to prioritize digestion metabolism at that time. It's trying to send all the energy to our extremities so that we can fight or run away from that perceived threat, whether that's like an internalized threat, like it's coming from our own intrusive thoughts, or if there is like something really stressful, like a bear chasing us through the woods. That's the example that I always use in session. But the long term or that chronic stress response, it's going to signal those adrenal glands to release our stress hormone cortisol. And that cortisol, it's going to increase our motivation, which includes like the motivation to eat. So that's when our appetite starts to go up. That initial like little fight or flight response, we might lose our appetite. We might see a little bit of weight reduction, but the cortisol, when that one starts taking over, we're like, oh yeah, give me all the food. That can also increase ghrelin, our hunger hormone. It can raise our blood sugar, insulin levels. And these hormone shifts cause us to crave specific foods. And
Mm.
it's really not going to be like the light salad with a vinaigrette or those kind of things. It's going to be more energy dense, highly palatable, high fat, high sugar foods. And in today's society, like these are very easy to come by. They're quick, convenient foods. They're going to be in the drive-through on the way home or by the counter at the grocery, like checkout. But this has kind of a feedback mechanism when we do ingest or eat and digest, metabolize those energy dense foods, it increases our happy hormones, dopamine and serotonin. And so it provides like a feeling of calmness. And sometimes people describe that as like an escape, like a way to unwind and relax, and they feel better initially. Now, after the fact, may be a different story. But this is totally natural, like you said, like with anxiety and stress, like it is, there's a reason it's there. Um, and a good percentage, like I said, of my clients, they do struggle with binge eating disorder. And some of those, like they aren't even present when they're eating these foods.
Mm.
And they'll sit there and they'll consume like an entire package or container of crumble cookies, like the 4 pack of crumble cookies. Or cookies are a common one that I hear.
Mm.
Makes sense because they're delicious.
Mhm.
But even if we're not consuming like the entire sleeve of Oreos, we may be consuming those highly palatable, energy dense foods over a period of time. Like they're in the house and we're snacking on these all day long. Maybe, like I said, it's the drive through situation when we're really busy. We've had a long day at work. We've commuted through lots of traffic and we just are tired already. And we don't want to go home and cook dinner. We want to get something that's more quick and convenient, which I think it's totally fine. Like we can have more convenient items, but I'm always trying to point people to foods that can also nourish our body in a meaningful way. So drive-through food can happen from time to time, but we want to prioritize those good nutrient-dense foods along the way. But kind of getting myself back on topic, the guilt that comes after eating these energy dense foods, and sometimes in larger quantities than people intended to. Um, they feel so guilty and so shameful, and that's why they come to me saying, like, Caitlin, I failed and I really need help. And their initial response is like, oh, I can't eat this anymore. Like it's that very all or nothing black or white mentality that you mentioned before. Like, oh, if I just don't have cookies in my house, if I never go through a drive through again, that's going to solve all the problems. and not necessarily that usually has like this backlash effect, which I'll cover a little bit more in some of the fun Q&A at the end. But I just want to provide a little bit of validation to our viewers because this is something that's very common for people to struggle with and something that I myself have struggled with. And I by no means meant to diminish anyone's experience of like trying to work through the toll that stress and anxiety takes on our diet specifically. Um, but yeah, any kind of feedback on that topic or anything else that you had to add there?
Hmm. I think you're, we're right there together. You know, again, that intersection and the stress and the anxiety. It does anxiety is one of the bigger mental health issues, I think, that creates thoughts of what's wrong with me. You know, what am I doing
Yeah.
wrong? You know,
Hmm.
that's a very hard space to be in. It's a very lonely space to be in, and it's not uncommon as well for anxiety to be kind of comorbid, if you will. So it kind of goes hand in hand with other strong emotions. So sometimes we feel anxious and depressed or sad. Sometimes we feel
Hmm.
anxious, and there could be some, frustration or some anger, feeling overwhelmed. And so we're trying to work through not just one emotion at that time, but sort of multiple
Yeah.
emotions, which is difficult. That personal experience that you were just referencing sounds very powerful. And I would imagine that, there's it sort of validates at times that, even us as professionals, we're going to experience things. We're human,
Hmm.
and that's really okay. And, it's about being able to be there for ourselves, but also to be there, with the clients that we work with. Um, and I think when there's that mechanism that says we don't need to stigmatize ourselves. We don't need to,
Yeah.
whether it's us or clients, we don't need to it's bad enough, it's hard enough and challenging enough to
Um,
experience anxiety, to experience panic
mhm.
attacks, to experience eating when we didn't anticipate to be eating or overeating or eating that sleeve of
Right.
cookies. But then we couple it and sort of like hit it even harder with this guilt and the shame. It just sort of like exacerbates, that anxiety higher and higher. So I think destigmatizing is just it's so necessary on
Yeah.
some levels.
Absolutely. And creating a safe space for people to bring their concerns and say, like, hey, I really do need help with this. Like, I followed all of these different diet plans in the past, and it only goes so far. And maybe like I've read all these self-help books and tried all the breathing exercises, and I still can't like quit. And I think people wrongfully assume that living with overeating, binge eating disorder, anxiety, stress, so forth and so on, recovery looks like complete abstinence, that they will never struggle with this again. And they're like, let me or take me to a place where I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to struggle with living with this day to day. And as a provider, I'm like, man, like that's a great aspiration. Like I wish you the best. That's what I would hope for. But realistically, what I try to do is say it's okay to binge from time to time. It's okay to feel anxious. It's okay to be a normal human. What we want to do is provide that support system that you need to work through these things so that hopefully we can decrease the frequency,
Right.
maybe even decrease the portion size that we're consuming in one sitting so that it's not negatively going to impact your health.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We give up this control, and I think we get more power back. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of us want to experience,
Mhm.
feeling empowered. We just don't know how to get there.
Yeah.
And if things happen once in a while, then sort of so be it. But how do you recover from that?
Hmm. Absolutely. Oh, I love that. Well, let's jump into the Q&A kind of portion of our video. I think first up, and let me make sure I'm getting to the right point here. Yeah, here we go. Um, This one, I think I'd like you to answer first, and then I'll kind of chime in with the nutrition answer. But first question is, I've tried so many diets. I hear this one a lot. I'm very laughing. I've tried so many diets, but I still can't lose weight. What is wrong with me? If someone was going to say that in session with you, what would your response be?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is, I mean, you can hear the pain, right? And I think that's the first point is to
Mhm.
really just kind of be there with the person that is experiencing, I failed, I'm never going to get this, I'm trying, nothing is working. So it kind of goes back to it's hard enough to change a behavior, but
Yeah.
then it becomes even more difficult when we're not being quote unquote successful in that change. And then we're beating ourselves up, and I think sometimes we beat ourselves up so much that we're actually beating ourselves down. And it just kind of like continues, continues, continues. So I think that the most important piece from a mental health perspective in this one is, I guess there's two. One is, there's nothing wrong with you. And that's a tough sell. What's wrong is that whatever you tried didn't generate the results that you anticipated. So
Yeah.
either we, retweak or tweak, the intervention, we add more, do less. But there's something about those what are called automatic thoughts that kind of get the person to this, what's wrong with me? The anxiety, the guilt, the shame, and that just very hard space. And then the other is more behavioral strategies, which I think this is going to be dependent on, if this person has tried multiple diets before and what success look like, maybe intentions for why they want to change the diet or why they're trying to lose weight or whatever it is that they're trying to do within the diet. But getting more at like that relationship between, is there an anxiety component that's going on when you are doing these behaviors? And if so, how do we sort of attack that anxiety component? And then,
Mhm.
of course, getting good support on the dietitian nutrition side, and getting someone involved like yourself.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so good because I'm on the other side and I'm like, we
Mm.
need support for your anxiety and stress. Like, let's talk to a therapist and get the mental health support we need so that our nutrition goals can be more successful long term because we really want to address root cause here.
Mhm.
From a nutrition perspective, I tell them the same thing. There's usually nothing wrong. That's
Mhm.
where like the intrusive thought that you just mentioned. Sometimes my clients are under eating and they're trying so hard to like follow a strict diet, maybe count calories, and it ends up slowing their metabolism, which ultimately weight gain or inability to lose weight. So it just, and man, it's a hard sell when they come see me and that's taking place. I'm like, you need to eat more. And they're like, oh my gosh, I absolutely can't. And I'm like, trust me, like we want to work towards that long-term picture of health. So getting enough nutrition, enough vitamins and minerals, it's going to help in the process of building support for your metabolism and then hopefully making it easier for you to manage a happy, healthy weight long term. And then just exploring the many reasons why clients might be struggling with weight management, whether it's specific labs. So I'm willing to like dive into that with them and look over like blood sugar, insulin resistance, that kind of thing, maybe like thyroid issues as well. Sometimes lack of physical activity. I know I looked at my step counter yesterday after working from home all day long and uh, she was less than like 100 steps. And so it's hard with our sedentary life. So I was like trying to build physical activity into our daily routine. Sometimes it's in balanced diet, like they're over consuming one macro versus like the others. Sometimes, like I mentioned, like stress eating, big issues that people get really frustrated chasing a specific number on the scale. And that's like their only definition of success. So I try to take a step back and see the whole person and say, like, hey, let's focus on those lifestyle behaviors that are going to not only hopefully spill over and impact your weight, but also help you feel better and
Mhm.
be more healthy long term. Um, and what does that picture of health look like to you? Does it look like better quality of life, being able to climb Mount Everest? Like, what are your goals? What do you want that to look like?
Mhm.
Is it a deeper issue like body image? That pops up a lot. Like, I have several clients that are like, I can't date or be in a relationship if I don't lose weight. Like, that is their pervasive thought. And so they're coming to me saying, like, give me a nutrition plan so that I can be in a relationship. And I'm just like, all right, let's back that up a little bit. Let's get more support to work through like body image. Maybe it's assuming that weight loss is going to make them more popular, more accepted by their family and friends. So again, kind of going back to body image there. But it really does help reduce the stress if we can say, like, I just want to show up for myself. I just want to take care of my body, whether that's with activity, diet, getting support for mental health, focus on the behaviors rather than the one number on the scale that they're assuming will define their success or failure. So I usually provide a list of non-scale victories. It's like 2 pages of ways that their nutrition or their health can improve just by establishing some of those healthy lifestyle behaviors. And I find that's really, really helpful and validating for people when they're going through the lifestyle behavior changes, because it can get really frustrating when they're just so focused on the number on the scale.
Mhm. Kind
All
of
right.
whatever that number is. I'm sorry.
No,
Whatever
go ahead.
whatever that number is, it sounds like it serves some sort of goal or and some sort of validation.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to know, or for us perhaps to explore that in another uh, uh, webinar at some point. Is
Hmm.
how does sort of like the meaning of that number, and
Yeah.
it's sort of like on a more deeper side to all of it, because it really does symbolize something, and it reminds me of like sometimes we're chasing happiness in certain ways that is not always the most productive way.
Yeah.
If we earn a certain amount of money, then we'll be happy. If we earn, we win the championship, right? And then we'll be happy. And what gets discovered is a lot of times, a lot of these sports teams, they win a championship. They're the next day, they're actually out practicing to win the next championship the next year. It's like we don't
Yeah.
always, you get a promotion, we're really happy about it, but we're not necessarily just sinking in that it's now, okay, the next promotion. We do that with so many different
Right.
things in areas of life. Very nice to just sort of like step back at times and appreciate, enjoy. And I think somewhere in there, perhaps there's a reason why we set these specific goals. And it just sounds like it kind of fits into what we're talking about.
Thank you so much for that. For our second question, we have, what can I do on a daily basis or overall to help reduce stress and anxiety so that it doesn't impact my eating? And I hear this question a lot, and we're going to go into kind of like response to help reduce overeating from a nutrition perspective. But first, I really wanted to kind of pinpoint what clients can do to help reduce their overall stress and anxiety, because they bring this to my session. I'm like, oh my goodness, please go talk to a therapist or your therapist if they have one. And a lot of them are just really trying to make progress in their nutrition goals, and are hitting that wall with stress and anxiety. And they're like, well, what do I do? So what would you tell a client that was just wondering what they can do to reduce and improve their mental health?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that question. It sounds like sometimes clients are struggling with being able to reach some sort of goal. And if the goal is around whether it's healthy eating, consistently dieting, weight loss, whatever that is, there's a pressure, I think, that is felt that we have to attain something. And that pressure could be wonderful at times because it can kind of motivate us, but too much of that turns into something else, like that stress and that anxiety. The anxiety is great on one hand, like I was referencing earlier, because it keeps things, it can hold us accountable to getting things done in the way that is going to be most helpful. And I think that as long as we're kind of moving forward in some of these goals, the more that we don't feel like we're failing. So I think sometimes when it comes to whatever the goal is for What would be an example of a goal that someone has around eating that you were just referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. A big one is like cooking at home more often, but then they get stressed at work and they find that they're um, staying in the office late, and then they're just going to run through the drive-through really quickly because they just can't deal with fixing a meal when they go home.
Yeah, so the anxiety comes up in I won't be able to get this done, and then they go through the drive-through, and then they feel like they failed, and then sort of
Mhm.
back and forth.
Yeah,
That's a hard cycle to
right.
get out of. So I think there's a few different ways to approach it. One is there's the longer term approach, which is viewing goals as just that, as a goal, right? It doesn't have to be met right now. That it's something that you
Mhm.
work towards, and there's behavioral strategies, and there's cognitive strategies. There's the ways to kind of look at some of that very negative thinking that you were just referring to and being able to over time challenge those thoughts, that perhaps it's okay that you're not going to eat at home, and this one day, it doesn't mean it's a failure. It just means it's a hiccup, or it's something that was needed at that time. And that's easier said than done, especially when someone has these goals and they're so driven. um, but more than on the other side to it is, okay, now I feel the anxiety coming up. The work is the day is getting later. I got more work to do. I want to get home and cook. I'm not going to be able to get there. I know I'm going to end up in the drive-through, and now your thoughts are just gone. Those automatic thoughts are just way down the road. So inevitably, your anxiety is going to increase. There's a few things you can do in that moment. One is you can really just recognize what's happening and just sort of normalize that this is anxiety and sort of label it. I have anxiety because, and sometimes what that does is doesn't get rid of it. It just sort of softens the sharp corners, if you will.
Yeah,
And in doing so, it slows down those thoughts. And that in turn, if your thoughts, those anxious thoughts slow down, your anxiety level doesn't peak all the way up. Things just are more controllable. There's other grounding techniques through
Mhm.
mindfulness that I think are very helpful. Sometimes it centers around breathing, sometimes it centers around just focusing on something very specific. Um, and maybe what we can do is we can have that on our websites, or something that we can send to some of the listeners if they're interested in more of these grounding techniques and some of
Yeah,
these anchoring techniques, because I think that's very, very helpful,
yeah.
especially in the moment.
Definitely. And I'm always mentioning, what healthy coping skills do you have to use? Let's work with a therapist to add to that list. Because
Mhm.
again, we need different ones for different situations. And that was a tough question to throw at you because I know there's so many things that you can do, and you're like trying to boil down years of experience to one short little response. But I appreciate that. That was great. Our next question is taking more like a nutrition side of things. So, what can I do to minimize overeating in response to stress? I'll go ahead and provide the answer. And then if you have any feedback, feel free to chime in. But I just want to kind of hit on, overeating looks different for every single person that I work with. This could be like full-blown binge eating where we eat objectively or subjectively large amounts of food in a short period of time. It could look like snacking all day long or eating foods that we don't set out to eat, we don't intend to eat, kind of going against like what we planned out. And then it could also look like eating beyond fullness. And there's several different forms of that. So I just wanted to cover how that could look for a few different people. From a nutrition perspective, first step is to ensure we're getting enough energy and nutrients spread throughout the day, multiple balanced meals multiple times per day that have carbs, proteins, fats, a little bit of fiber, a little bit of color in there would be great. And when we get that energy earlier in the day or spread throughout the day, it avoids what we call rebound eating, where clients will skip meals, breakfast, lunch, snacks, and then have to make up for it by eating a large quantity of food at the end of the day, which naturally kind of leads to us feeling like overly full, uncomfortable, then we're trying to fall asleep on a full stomach. But if we add multiple balanced meals, it also fills in any nutritional gaps that we may be missing. For example, like I'll have clients that want to be mindful of their carb intake and keep that kind of low, but they end up like seeking those high carb foods because they're not getting enough with their meals. So they'll end up overeating those carby, snacky foods. So, firstly, is getting the energy throughout the day. Secondly, would be I encourage people to get support for their relationship with food so that they can work on nutrition goals, which is exactly what you just touched on a second ago. Having those healthy coping skills, support for the mental health, and practice some mindfulness, intuitive eating that helps you slow down while eating, listen to your body's internal cues, those hunger and fullness cues, and then avoids like the stress eating, kind of the drive-through situation that I presented earlier. A lot of people are overwhelmed from the events of the day. They know that they wanted to eat at home. Maybe they had chicken in the fridge that they wanted to cook, but they're like overwhelmed and they're like, what do we eat? What do I eat? What do I eat? And they're going through the drive-through because they're like almost in that fight or flight response, like, oh, I have to do this because there's no other choice. And then they feel like a failure. So really, if we're able to get multiple meals throughout the day, maybe have a snack for that ride home. Then we're not like starving, getting overly hungry. Then we have a chance to get home and kind of rest and digest instead of live in that fight or flight response.
Mhm.
And speaking to the hunger and fullness cues, I have resources that I provide clients that give a scale and kind of a breakdown so that they can rebuild that trust in their body. It ranks hunger and it ranks fullness. And then we try to stay in the middle where we eat when we are starting to get hungry, and then we stop and complete our meal when we are satisfied and content. And
Mhm.
again, I love that you said that you could go on your website and find some of those resources. I also have a way to send some of these resources to clients, and I'll mention that at the end. But anything else that you had to add before we move into our next question?
Well, I think, I appreciate a lot of that approach, but also something that stands out is the trust that someone has in their body. And there's something that's so vital about that, really understanding that we all have this mechanism that we can hone in on something about us, and there's an intuition that's there. And that stress, anxiety can really pop you out of it. It really causes us to feel like,
Right.
like an imposter syndrome or something. Or it causes us to feel like we're not really attuned to who we are. So those grounding techniques, those mindful techniques, sounds like I can see that'd be very helpful. That's awesome.
Okay, next question, number 4 is I seem to eat beyond fullness when going out or celebrating, maybe hitting up like the office parties. We're always going to have cake, and I always regret it. Why does this happen? Anything that you have like as feedback, and then I'll kind of dive into the nutrition side of things.
Yeah, I think sometimes we just do get caught up in things. And I really think that sometimes it's truly, that's okay. Maybe it's not 100% applicable to every situation, but sometimes, when we have a disparaging thought that comes afterwards about what we did, like perhaps I failed, I should have done, what's wrong with me, then it becomes something else. But I think the other piece to this, and something that I talk with clients, especially, other situations of, um, I have this meeting, and why did I act this way in this meeting? Or I did this, and why did I do this? Sometimes we're just not necessarily uh, prepared enough for some of these events. We can over prepare and then we get in trouble, and that's the anxiety and perfectionism piece.
Mhm.
But if we're not really being intentional with how it is we want to be, then it's hard to have some sort of framework to come back to it when we start to kind of slip a little bit when we're in that moment and we are overeating. So perhaps there's a plan, but also part of the plan is not so it's got to go 100% or none, that there's a little bit of wiggle room that perhaps this other piece of something looks good,
Right.
and therefore I'll indulge, I'll enjoy. And again, within perspective, within very specific situations. Um, but I think sometimes that's just that one approach is just sort of lessening the rigidity, that I think that
Mhm.
occurs at times.
Oh, I love hearing you say that. That is something that I emphasize as well, because we need to be flexible when working on our nutrition goals. There's no need for perfectionism. We're always going to be humans. And I think when we reduce the need for perfectionism, we reduce the stress as a byproduct when working on these healthy lifestyle behaviors. Another thing that I would use as an answer to this question was a lot of people are stuck in a binge restrict cycle. And this is another one of those handouts that I'll pull up in session a lot of the time, where we have extra fun foods that are on a pedestal. They're really exciting. They're going to be those celebration foods. And we kind of have them in a bad food category, like I shouldn't have this. And maybe a restrictive mentality around those, like they should only be for certain occasions. I can't have them in the house. They're not on my diet, that kind of thought pattern. And then when we do enjoy them, we end up overdoing it because it's a kind of a Last Supper mentality, or like, I have to eat this right now because this isn't going to be on my diet tomorrow. So by working out of that binge restrict cycle, we can really work to make peace with our plate and peace with those specific foods and kind of habituate them in a way where we don't feel like we're going overboard when we do have them because they're going to be available again.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I would do. And then the other answer would be just really tuning in to your hunger and fullness cues, like we mentioned with the last question. Because if we're overeating, it may be because that food is super exciting. It may be because we haven't eaten all day and we're actually super hungry. Maybe we're really stressed and we're trying to use food as that coping skill. So it's giving that dopamine and serotonin and it's helping us feel calm and relaxed and chill at the celebration. But then later we have all that guilt and shame that comes as a result because we overindulged. We ate the foods that we thought were on the bad list, the naughty list.
It sounds like at times, the commonality besides the anxiety and the stress is this guilt and shame piece that is sort of nipping on the heels of most of these behaviors. And it could be a struggle, I think, for those that have already experienced guilt and shame, that they know what that feels like and they know what that is, to then re-experience it, especially as it's there.
Yeah. And I tell my clients that guilt and shame are such terrible motivators. I don't meet many people who are able to set a healthy lifestyle behavior or achieve a goal because they were feeling guilty and shameful. Much better if we can see our nutrition goals from a place of self-care and then work out of that perfectionistic mindset of I have to be fill in the blank to be successful with my diet or any other area for that matter.
Right, right.
Okay, question number 5. We have I'm on a specific diet and I no longer look forward to going out with friends or family. It's causing me a lot of stress. What should I do? Do you hear this one in session?
I do. I hear it in different instances of the I conceptualize it as the power of anxiety. And boy, does it make us do certain things. And the avoidance of going out to some of these events becomes very real. And the more that we start to avoid a situation, the more the anxiety says, see, I was right. You shouldn't be going out. This is more of a threat. So the stress turns into something else, and something else turns into something else. And before you know it, you're beginning to avoid, you're isolating, you're not necessarily doing the things, or you're there and you're just not even enjoying yourself, which is just as worse, than it is. And so the part of the way to look at it is what can you do beforehand to feel most comfortable and confident in the moment? And I think that there are some great grounding techniques and great mindfulness techniques for that. Great visualization, also preparing for what that could experience be like. And when I work with clients around anxiety, one of the biggest pieces that I talk to them about is the difference between preparing and predicting. When we start to predict something's going to happen, I think we get in trouble. If we prepare for what may happen, then there's a better chance we can kind of pull it out, when it's needed. So it really gives confidence. I think it goes back to what you're saying also, just sort of that trust, in ourselves. Um, but if from sort of a deeper perspective, that maybe you're not going because there's something bigger going on, right? That there's something that isn't just about you uh, and your experience, but maybe there's something that really is about the family and something that you're being triggered by. So
Yeah.
like a little bit more exploration is there that's needed. But truthfully, it's a very solvable, fixable, manageable kind of thing. But that's a tough sell when you're in it, and the last thing you want to do is be in it and experiencing that. Uh, it really does sit with you to whatever is next. And sort of like I was saying before, it doesn't have to be another dinner the next time with the same family and friends. It could be something that is sort of congruent enough, like a work event, and now all of a sudden the work event isn't as pleasant, and now it's hard to you're avoiding it, you're not wanting to go it, and it's hard to tell. Is it just because it's an anxiety thing, or is it coming from somewhere else?
Mm,
So being able to kind of break that open a little
yeah.
bit, I think could be very helpful. And the
Exploring that
nutrition,
fully. That's
so yeah.
great. And I try to highlight in session that there's multiple pillars of health that we have to work to acknowledge and support, like financial health, nutritional health, mental, social, cultural, so forth and so on. When setting nutrition goals and working on things related to our diet, like getting enough protein, adding fiber, minimizing like added sugars, that might be a goal. I encourage people to go out with family and friends because that is honoring their social health. Like, we want to be able to spend time with our loved ones and without all the stress and anxiety. So if your nutrition goals are getting in the way and becoming a trigger, that's not good. Like that's not going to work long term for long term health and well being. So trying to find that balance there of how can I respect my finances, take care of my mental health, go to fun family, social events, parties, so forth and so on. Maybe have some of those fun foods, take away those, rules that I have to be perfect in every aspect with my diet. But also, we do want to take care of our nutritional health. So, how do we find that balance? And again, it's going to be individualized to the person that's sitting in front of me. But nutrition goals don't need to get in the way of family time. I'm just a firm believer of that. I think we'll be much happier and healthier long term if we're able to balance those different pillars of health.
Mhm. Yeah, the social component, I think it's easily overlooked, right? And
Mhm.
sort of the family component, the closeness, the relationships, it's something that's just so needed. And it seems like so far, like the theme in a lot of these questions that we're hearing is um, the what am I an outlier? Am I the one that like what's wrong with me kind of
Yeah,
thing? And I think we're
absolutely.
seeing, at least in our discussion, that there is nothing wrong. That this is something that a lot of us struggle with at times. But the thoughts could just be so powerful and make us feel that way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, next up, we have question number 6, and this is, can stress and anxiety cause weight loss or a lack of appetite? And I could dive in and kind of give the nutrition side and let you respond here. But stress not only impacts food intake, like we kind of discussed earlier, but it also impacts energy expenditure or our metabolism, the calories that are burned throughout the day. That short term stress, like that fight or flight response, initially, it's going to mobilize the energy stores and help us respond to the threat or the bear that's chasing us. We need the energy to fuel our escape. Now, initially, this is going to reduce our appetite. We're not going to be thinking about food in this moment. We're running away from whatever's chasing us, mentally or physically. But long term, or initially it's going to cause some weight loss, but long term, this might make it more challenging to keep those cortisol levels low. But any response, because the next question goes hand in hand with more like weight gain, but anything that you had to add as a response to that question?
I think not too much. I think you're kind of hitting on the metabolism piece and what is really occurring, internally. But yeah, I'm interested to hear maybe the next question and kind of how that segues in.
Definitely. The next one is very similar. It's kind of the other side of the coin. Can stress and anxiety make it more difficult for me to lose weight? And I do hear this one very often. So we talked about the short-term response. This one's more the long-term stress, releasing cortisol, but
Mhm.
it also releases a stress hormone. It's a steroid hormone from the adrenal glands called glucocorticoids. And those help supply the energy demands of stress, but it also promotes energy storage and increased eating, and then as a result, weight gain. And those glucocorticoids are also related to increased energy storage in particular areas of our body, like our central abdomen area, which clients really don't like hearing. And I wish that wasn't a thing. I really do. But I have a lot of people who are like, why do I carry weight right here? And it may be genetics, that's also a component, but it could also be that long-term stress response, elevated cortisol, and then the release of those glucocorticoids that lead to that. So stress does make it difficult for you to lose weight, and it might even contribute to weight gain as well.
Mm.
So again, emphasizing the need, we got to target that root issue there, the stress and anxiety, and really, um, yes, embrace it. We're going to be human. We have it for a reason. It's not all bad, but is it getting in the way of our health? Is it getting in the way of us being able to go out and socialize and set nutrition goals and stick to them in a really meaningful, helpful way?
Right. Right. That self-talk is the name of the game, when it comes to being able to, one of the approaches and able to manage anxiety. And so if we are focusing solely on what things will never look like, we'll never reach that goal. We'll never get rid of that abdomen area that you're referring to. Then our feelings and our behaviors are going to follow. And so the being able to really challenge and modify that thought, it really requires a lot of, I think, confidence at times within
Yeah.
ourselves and trust in ourselves that we can actually think about things and look at things differently. We have to collect this evidence to suggest that a newer thought is true. And as we do that, then that gives us a little bit more power over the anxiety. And then in turn, our perspective begins to change. And I think when clients and when others start to kind of see that change, then their perspective on perhaps that abdomen area is just not the same. The corners are kind of smoothed out a little bit on how they view, body image, and more importantly, I'm sorry, just as important is how they view their own anxiety. That it is manageable. It is, there is a way to kind of look at things differently.
No, that's excellent. Well, Justin, thank you so much for doing this with me and going through those questions. We'll have our company websites and contact info listed below when we post the video. If you would comment any questions or topics that you would like Justin and I to discuss in future videos, please do so. I think one of the future topics that you mentioned earlier was why is weight so important? And then you just touched on it again with body image concerns. And that's a big one that I see pop up as a dietitian. So that would be great if we want to collaborate on that as well. And then follow us on socials. And we look forward to convening with you again. Thank you, Justin.
Thanks, Jason. This has been great.